government-controlled projects were not all bad. You see, the problem here is that so-called conservatives assume automatically as a knee-jerk, we hear about knee-jerk liberals, but the knee-jerk conservatives, right? No, we don't need infrastructure. Well, who's going to do the infrastructure? That's the issue. Who's going to do the infrastructure rebuilding? Who's going to do it for us? So now some of you are going to call and foolishly give me the party line, privatize the construction. There are some projects that are too vast to be privatized. That's number one. Number two, there are people who are driving on toll roads today, roads that were privatized. And guess who built some of these privatized roads? The communist Chinese own them. And I can name a few of the roads in America that you're riding on, that you pay a toll on. The roads are owned by the communist Chinese because the government couldn't build them. Do you understand that? 855-400-7282 is the phone number. I would be remiss not to mention this is day number 3 of the publication of my new novel, Countdown to Mecca. It's doing quite well. I can prove I am being sabotaged on Amazon.com once again. I'll prove it to you in 1 or 2 sentences. If you go to Amazon.com, it's number 6 or number 7 on the mystery, suspense, and thrillers. And then when you click mystery, suspense, and thrillers, they show the top 10 or 12 book covers, but not Michael Savage's Countdown to Mecca. It goes the book number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. My book is missing. Once again, there is sabotage from within, from the vermin in the publishing industry, the little people who work in bookstores, the little people who work at Amazon, the little people who work at publishing companies, the little people at Fox News who have banned this book. Yes, the Lilliputians are doing it again. Countdown to Mecca is a great book. And for those of you who can't afford it or don't want to buy it, I will read a few pages from each of 3 chapters a little later in the program. But check it out for yourself. I want to go back, though, to the issue at hand, which is the issue of infrastructure. John Boehner wisely said the following in clip 3. Let's hear it.
Are you really going to ask such a stupid question? Listen, they started this yesterday. It's all about funding. It's all about funding. Well, obviously, it's not about funding. The train was going twice the speed limit. Adequate funds were there. No money's been cut from rail safety. And the House passed a bill earlier this spring to reauthorize Amtrak and authorize a lot of these programs.
All right, so he's right about that. It's not about infrastructure, but the infrastructure's falling apart. That's my whole point.
Join the Savage Nation. Call now, 855-400-SAVAGE, 855-400-7282. Savage.
Infrastructure spending gets bogged down in regional politics, but there's an infrastructure crisis in every part of the country, and I don't know why we don't steal this issue from the Democrats. Joe Biden said the truest thing I've ever heard, that our area airports here are like those in a third world country. Why don't we as Republicans take this on and find a conservative way that puts money back into the economy? I think in this Republican primary, we're going to have a pretty in-depth conversation about education. I don't know how we see people getting to these hubs of higher learning if we don't have ways to get them there.
She's right. That's former McCain strategist Dee Wallace, who is wrong on everything but was right on this, that the Republicans should own this issue. The Republican Party should have come out front and said we need to rebuild our roads and our bridges and our tunnels and taken control of it, and not let it fall into the hands of the corrupt, greedy Democrat, Socialist, Islamist Party. And so there it is. That's the story. I mean, both sides are politicizing the train wreck. Knee-jerk conservatives just as bad on this as the knee-jerk liberals. And I've told you that some of the great bridges and tunnels and buildings were built with the government as overseer and funder. Do you know that the Empire State Building was built in 1 year? From the time of the beginning of construction to the end, 1 year. You could not build a dining room set today in 1 year without OSHA and 50 other governmental agencies telling you where the wood came from. Did it endanger a snail, a dart snail in the Philippines? Was there an endangered species that was damaged when they pulled a tree out of the ground? Did a worker have a miscarriage because they worked in a factory an extra 3 minutes? It take you more than a year to get permission to build a dining room set today than the time it took to build the Empire State Building. So that's another problem, which is government bureaucracy. I'm always amazed when I read that the fabulous Golden Gate Bridge, which I drive over a few times a week, which I love, every time I leave San Francisco and I look at the chain of lights at night, this necklace hanging through the fog, it lifts me up. I mean, not only is it an important structure in terms of connecting San Francisco to the Northern California, the rest of Northern California, meaning Marin County, but it's also aesthetically gorgeous. That took 2.5 years to build from beginning to end. Can you imagine trying to get permission from this group of bureaucrats to build a bridge today, how long it would take, the bureaucracy? So there's a lot of issues that need to be talked about. They're all intertwined. But at the end of the day, our infrastructure is falling apart. If you've been out of America, you know just what I'm talking about. It's an embarrassment to come back to the United States after looking at the roads and the bridges and whatnot in the other countries. Okay, so let's go to some of the callers. The phone number is 855-407-282. But again, I would be remiss if I didn't remind you that I guess I personally have a story about the federal government having played a very important role in jobs during the Great Depression. And I told you about my father's friend, the tough kid from the slums, who went into the CCC camps that employed 2 million poor Americans. And they did every kind of job imaginable. They lived just in a camp. It was rough. They did rough work, rough manual work. But it gave them a living, and they were able to come back and maybe start their lives, which many of them did. My father, I don't even know how he got the job to this day. I know he told me about it. I never really paid attention. He died in 1970, so I have no way to ask him. And there's no one around who could answer the question. I don't know how a poor kid from the east side of New York ever got the job. He had no education whatsoever. He worked since he was 6 years old driving a laundry truck with a horse on it, if you can believe it. He got a job as a chauffeur for a New York City assemblyman, and he told me stories about driving the assemblyman to, I think, Saratoga Springs, to a racetrack a couple of times, and some of the stories he saw that he didn't talk about what went on. I said, I never asked him how he got the job. All I was interested in were the stories about him driving the car. But the point is, the federal government provided the funds through the New Deal, considered socialist by knee-jerk doctrinaire conservatives who tell you to privatize everything, including your own nose. He got the job through the federal, probably government. Money filtered down to the city. They hired kids who didn't have a dime, got them off the streets. And as a result of that, he was able to come back and start his own life. So there is a role for government. Now, there's a problem here that needs to be stated. The corruption of this government now is nothing, absolutely not to be compared, rather, to what was going on in this country in previous generations. Yes, there was probably graft and corruption and all sorts of steering of contracts. But today is a different story. Under this corrupt Democrat machine, the corruption of federal contracts is legion. It has crippled the nation. I'll give you one example. Solyndra, the solar energy company. Do you remember at the beginning of Obama's regime, the first year, Solyndra was closed down, the FBI crashed it and took all the records. Remember we said, thank God somebody will go to jail? And I said, wait a minute, no. By dint of the fact that Obama's FBI went in there and got the records means nobody will ever pay for the missing $500 million. I was right. Nobody has ever been arrested for stealing $500 million of government funds to create a solar project. But by the way, that is the least of our problems. There are many other solar energy companies that are complete shams and frauds. We can name them. Nobody has gone to jail. They're feasting like pharaohs on the stolen money on these government-funded projects. So don't think that I'm suddenly saying spend $10 trillion on infrastructure and let the government manage it. We need a clean government to do it. I don't think we're ever going to have a clean government in America again, ever. I don't think it's possible. But that's a second problem, a secondary problem to the issue of the fact that our infrastructure is dying. It's falling apart. 855-407-282. If you care to chime in on this discussion, great. Let's do it. I don't know where to begin. I really don't know where to begin. I got great calls. Okay, we'll go to Paul on WABC. Paul, go ahead. Give us your opinion.
Hi, Mike. Good afternoon. What I want to speak about, everything you discussed about is corruption. I mean, I remember...
Hold, sir. Can you please speak up and clearly? If you're on a phone, clean it up or something. I can't hear you.
Right now, sir?
Better. Go. Fast.
Okay. Well, Empire State Building was done in 1 year. It's taken 15 years to get the Freedom Tower up. And we had a person here that wanted to cut a tunnel from Connecticut to Long Island, and the government wouldn't let them do it. But they'll spend $3 billion for bridges now over the fact that it's costing too much on the Tappan Zee Bridge. It's all corruption. And these EPA rules now are making it so intense that if you don't have the right metal, the right wood or whatever, you can't build it. It's so much graft and corruption. You are correct, sir.
Right. Well, of course, it's corrupt from top to bottom, the so-called red tape, the bureaucracy. Here in San Francisco, there's a huge scandal of the rebuilding of the Oakland-San Francisco Bay Bridge. The bridge is falling apart. The steel rods were insufficient for the job. Has the contractor been arrested? Have the contractors who built this, have the suppliers of the steel rods been arrested? Has the FBI done anything? Has Obama looked into it? No. Why? Because the corrupt unions are involved with the builders. So, yeah, there's a problem there. I understand that, Paul. And by the way, everyone who gets on the show today and tomorrow, maybe this week only, I'm not even going to talk about the book next week, maybe one more week, will get a free copy as Paul is getting right now of Countdown to Mecca. 855-407-2882. Maybe in the next hour I'll read 2 more pages from each of 4 chapters. For those of you who don't want to buy the book or can't afford it, I'll entertain you with some good reading. KSFO, San Francisco. Matt, line 4, fire away. What's on your mind?
Michael, further on the Bay Bridge that you already mentioned, was supposed to be $1 billion budget on that project. It turned out to be $6 billion and took much more time. The whole system is corrupt, and that's why I think people have a reluctance to want to pay more taxes, as the Democrats are calling for.
Well, of course. Notice I said there's 2 separate issues here. Our infrastructure is crumbling. We all agree on that, correct?
It is, yeah.
Okay, but we also know the corruption and inefficiency of the government is so overwhelming that they're not the ones to do the job. This government is not. It doesn't mean that there could not be another government that would be correct to supervise this reconstruction of our infrastructure.
I serve on a city council. It's up and down the line. It's not just at the federal level. It's
wait, you mean the city councils are corrupt?
It's not so much of a corruption, but you've got, like for us, 80% of our budget just goes to pay for salaries and benefits.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned it. There's a little town in Marin County called Larkspur, perhaps one of the most corrupt cities I've ever seen in my life. There are roads that are broken, they will not repave, but the corrupt members of various and sundry committees have given themselves pensions and then left the state on retirement, moving to North Carolina or Arizona, living like pharaohs while the roads are broken in Larkspur, California. So I know from one small town what corrupt little bureaucrats can be like.
Yeah.
And it's the pensions. San Rafael, California, unfunded pensions, something like $2 billion. They'll never be able to pay those pensions. And yet they kept rewarding themselves with pensions for doing such wonderful jobs. I get it. Okay, so we're talking about 2 separate topics. One is, no one's argued with me that the infrastructure is not falling apart, because that would be illogical to say that. We do need to rebuild the infrastructure, but we need a government that is not corrupt to do it. We don't know where to turn for that government. It is systemic. It's a disease. It's a cancer. Matt, I'm sending you a free copy of my novel, Countdown to Mecca. Very important project that we're talking about today here in San Francisco. Again, here's an example of the wonders of reconstruction. The approach to the Golden Gate Bridge was known as Doyle Drive. It was antiquated. It was built in the 1930s. It was only a few lanes, almost out of The Godfather. The toll booths on the Golden Gate Bridge, if you remember, looked almost like the toll booths in The Godfather when Sonny gets machine gunned. They were very beautiful. I mean, they were Art Deco toll booths, but they were very narrow for the cars at the time. The roadway leading up from the city onto the bridge was narrow, antiquated, falling apart. So a number of years ago, wise city planners decided they needed to build a new entrance to the Golden Gate Bridge. Took years to get the approvals. Well, you want to hear something? I've driven over the bridge for years now as they've been rebuilding this entrance to the Golden Gate Bridge. I have never seen, this is an engineering marvel what they've done. They're building 2 new phenomenal tunnels. One has been, ready for about a year, the one into the city. The new